Hi there, welcome to the Nitty Gritty Writing Podcast. I'm Simon Cantan.
And I'm Dave Higgins.
And today we're going to be talking about getting professional help, which is usually, yeah, it sounds like seeking professional help, which is usually editors and cover designers. But before we do that, we're going to talk about our writing this week. Sorry, I was distracted there by the feed going as usual. Sorry. So we're going to talk about our writing weeks this week. Dave, would you like to go first?
Okay, let's see. As is usual, another episode of Seven Stones, my Swords and Sorcery serial, outlined, written, edited, polished, and published this morning. So that's 60 episodes now. So my process for that is probably about as efficient as it's going to get. Let's see, what else have I done? Started doing a redraft on Prologue, which is the first part of the fantasy series I'm writing with Simon. And see, what else have I done? Washing machine went kaplunk, so I lost about a day to draining the drum and getting the clothes dried out and so on, and getting that sorted. So that was slightly annoying. And I got a commission for the ebook formatting service that I offer to put together a series of novellas. So that's taken up a bit of my time. So it's not been a great week for writing my own stuff, but half the reasons that I haven't been writing my own stuff are bringing in a bit of money, so I'm not going to complain about them.
Grand. In my week, I have, let's see. I don't know, I think I mentioned last week, I'm now part of two bundles that we're going to bring out later this year. One's fantasy, the other's dystopian sci-fi. The fantasy is urban/paranormal fantasy for the most part, but some people are putting in other fantasy subgenres. So both of them look fairly promising. We now have about 8 people in each. So we'll see. Like, some people might not quite get there, but we'll see how it goes. I've worked out as well, I did a little very simple Excel spreadsheet to work out how much time, because I know how long a novel takes me to write, how much time Sorcery, which is the book I'm working on at the moment in the adventure series, and Legacy, and the paranormal fantasy, and the dystopian sci-fi would take me, plus I've got another book in the Kyra Siren series, how much that'll all take me, and worked out that I don't have enough time in my day as it was to manage to do all those things. So I then tried to figure out where I could find time in the week, and I'm now waking up at half an hour earlier. I was waking up at 5:30, now I'm waking up at 5, which is starting to get a bit ridiculous. I posted on Facebook that now when I'm driving in, the radio is saying, "And welcome back to our nighttime programming," rather than our morning programming. But yeah, so I'm a bit tired this week, but that's the only way to get everything I want to do done. And on Sorcery, I got 16,000 words because of that extra. So normally I write about 10,000 words, more or less, in a week. So now I wrote 16,000. And I also started outlining the paranormal fantasy, which is going to, the working title at least so far, is Personal Gods, which I think sounds kind of urban fantasy-ish.
Yeah, it does.
And it's going to have vampires in it. And so then I was thinking, well, paranormal fantasy, it has to be the Twilight-y kind of vampires. And then I was trying to outline something like that, and I wasn't interested in writing it at all anymore. So then I went, oh, screw that. I'm going to make like proper vampires, like actual scary kill people vampires. So yeah, that's what I've been working on. So we'll crack on with the topic.
Yep.
I figured we'd start then with editing.
Yep.
Sorry, go ahead.
Said makes sense.
Oh, Grant. So I've had a number of editors, professional, and we kind of last year did a kind of a deal where we swapped editing for a couple of things. And I've had varying degrees of success with that. So one thing I was thinking was that Shiny New Swindle was edited back in 2014, I think. It started 2014. It started 2015. It was written in 2014. Anyway, and that cost me $500 for that copy editing. And then I just went through it recently, and it was not very good. However, I've been thinking about it, and in fairness to the editor, there's only so much you can do. So the sentence structure and the paragraph structure was bad. But as a copy editor, it's very difficult to then say you need to fix nearly every sentence in the whole thing. It's, I guess, the copy editor's job to give it about a 10% boost or something like that, not to give it a 50 or 60 or 70% boost. So I've had that experience. The other negative experience I've had with editors is time, where editors can take a long time to edit something, because whilst my books are the most important thing to me, they're one of dozens at least books that they're editing, and some editors I've dealt with are also authors, so they're obviously going to concentrate on their own things first. So on that side, I had something that was going to be published in October, and I gave it to the editor in June, and I got it back. In the end, it was late October, I believe. It was after it was meant to have published. So I'd self-edited at that stage. So yeah, a big mess. So my experiences generally are not very good, which is why I'm now trying to self-edit as much as possible, because I know that I can be picky about things and spend my time but do it right away. So if I want to publish something, say I just finished something now and I want to publish it in June, I know that I can concentrate, get it done, have it up on Amazon and ready for pre-order or whatever it needs to do. Self-edited. So yeah, how about you, Dave?
I've had mostly the same experience, really. That there do seem to be three categories of editors: the ones who are very cheap, the ones who you think, well, I can feel that I'm paying for this, and the ones where you're paying thousands of pounds for it. I can understand the service the £1,000 plus editors are offering, that they are probably very good at what they do, and they're going to catch an awful lot of things. But I haven't taken a really expensive edit yet, because at the point where I am in my career, I'm not earning enough to cover that for a very long time. So potentially over the entire lifetime of a book, it might work out. But if you take, say, well, I want to clear the costs on this book within a couple of years, so I'm not just pouring money and pouring money and pouring money constantly and never making anything at all. splurging several £1,000s on the edit plus all of the additional costs, it starts to make the point, well, I'm writing, but I'm never actually seeing any kind of return at all. So I wanted to start clearing some books, get to the point where actually, well, okay, I now know I can sell books before I start really putting the money into it. And there are definite benefits to that, but I think potentially it's too expensive as an upfront cost for me at the point where I am to realistically get a good return on investment. For the middle scale editors, I'm finding the same experience that you had, that you pay for it, and if you get it back, it saved you the amount of time it would take you to do that. But the amount of time it's there in their hands and the amount of time it takes you to then go through their edits and check things and go back to them with points you're not sure about, it comes out as, well, I could have done that myself. It would have put a first draft further behind than it would have been otherwise, but is the cost to me in money better or worse than the cost in time? And because I quite like editing, I find potentially paying someone who's at about the same level as I am, but just has the advantage that they are more distant from the book, isn't getting me a vast amount over sticking the book aside for a month and then coming back to it and going through it with my self-editing process. I have a back and forth. I mean, every time someone reads a book that I've written, they find a couple of things that don't make sense to them, or the occasional comma that's out of place. But whether paying an editor to do that is getting me my money's worth, I vacillate back and forth on. And
well, even myself, and I'm picky as a reader, I'm reading a book at the moment. So I'm reading an urban fantasy because I'm prepping to kind of figure out what's good and bad about the genre. And there's been a couple of like missing commas where someone says, "Hi, honey, I'm home," or something, and they don't have "Hi, comma, honey, comma, I'm home." But that's not affecting, like, the story is good. Whereas I read another urban fantasy, I got to 80% through it, and the story was absolute dreck. So then I dropped it because it was perfectly edited. It was flawless, but the story was terrible.
It's just occurred to me that potentially, before we get too far into it, we should touch on the different types of editing, because what you're expecting in the edit, you mentioned there isn't so much a copy editor can do, which is right, because copy editing is only one of the sets of editing. So in terms of what you can get an editor for, and my categories are approximations that overlap, and some people use different terms, but I mean, it's developmental editing, which is, does the story make sense? Do the larger concerns make sense?
And that often would be the most useful. As I say, like, that would be, for the first book I read that was boring, a story edit would, a developmental edit would say, not enough is happening in this book. There needs to be some kind of action, or, some conflict to be driving this forward. Yeah,
so you developmental edit to say, well, does this book flow at the speed that readers of this genre will want it to flow at? Because obviously some people like a slow build, some people like a fast build, but an action story where nothing happens, it isn't going to work. An action story where it's all in someone's head probably isn't going to work. Whereas with a romance, you want a lot more internal dialogue and the really big, exciting thing not happening yet. It's all about build-up. So you want someone to look at it and go, well, do the characters work? Does the story work? Is the ending exciting, or does it get to the 80% point and then kind of trickle through the remaining 20% without anything really paying off the reader getting to that point? And then next to that, the copy edit, which is the more technical structure of the story as opposed to the imaginative bit of the story. So do the sentences actually physically make sense? Is there duplicated content between the start of paragraph 1 of the first chapter and paragraph 6 of the second chapter, where you just tell the reader the same thing? Does the character's eye color change from blue to green partway through the story? Have you changed the spelling of the character's middle name? All of this kind of thing. Then the last stage for me that I split out, and this is where very nebulously separated from copy editing potentially, is line editing, which is someone just going through the entire thing, going, well, are all the commas in the right places? Have you used the right kind of dash? Have you used a hyphen instead of an em dash, or vice versa? And then potentially within editing is also proofreading, which would be looking at the manuscript after it's been prepared for publication to say, well, where you've got a dash, have you got the same amount of space on each side? Has something gone wonky? So one of the angle brackets of your code's been converted to text, so the italics have disappeared and you've got a string of random gobbledygook in the middle of your paragraph, and so on. So I think for me, each of those three can be covered off in different ways. In terms of going through the book, looking to make sure that all of the commas are in the right place and so on, and before and after conversion, the text is actually technically perfect, notwithstanding any more metaphysical errors there could be. You can do that by grinding through line by line if you're a patient person. So, and having worked on legal documents for a great many years, I've spent a chunk of my working life going through a document looking for spelling errors, commas in the wrong place, things that don't quite represent what they should. So for me, grinding through a document, while it's tedious, isn't something that I'd go, oh, I'm going to miss a lot. Because I expect to find things, because I know in the past I've found things in legal documents I've written where the punctuation is more important than a book of fiction. So for me, line editing isn't potentially as valuable as it is for someone who doesn't have that experience. But developmental editing can be useful for me, but also I can get it by having someone who isn't an editor read the story, because that's the most readerish bit of the process, whether the story is actually going to be fun for readers. So potentially you could get a beta reader or a family member, and we're going to be doing a podcast later in the series about getting non-professionals to look at your work. But so we'll cover more then potentially, but you can cover off some of the developmental editing with that. So
I think if the guy that co-wrote Story Grid, at his kind of level, where he splits the profits or he gets a considerable paycheck, he is giving you something more than a family member would be able to, or but then you're talking about that's a completely different level than we're at. So that's someone who could say, okay, well, this is the arc of your story, and here's the bit where this doesn't work, so therefore this, change this to make this work, or this is a trope in the genre that you have to have, so add this in, or whatever it happens to be, where they're actually changing the structure of the story. And that would be very useful. But that's not where we're at. And kind of, yeah, I mean, it's, from at least my experience, the editors haven't been all that much better than, as you're saying, just showing it to someone you trust as a family or friend, family member or friend who likes to read that genre and says, I like this, or this isn't as good as the stuff in the genre I usually read, or whatever it happens to be.
I don't know if it's a better so much as it's, and there's a time, it's all coming down for me to a time I have to spend versus money I have to spend equation. And so there are some editors I've seen who you think, well, they're very cheap, and then so I think, are they trying to drum up business, or are they deliberately scooping low? So you try, well, they'll offer a free sample. I'll take that just to see, and it comes back and it looks worse than when I've done it myself. They think, well, and sort of and that doesn't mean that they are necessarily bad editors. It does mean that sort of editing is partially an art. So you need an editor who fits your style. Because there are horror stories I've seen of authors who've had their book come back from a trad pub editor. So someone who's paid to do it. This book is got the contract with a publisher. It comes back, and because the editor's style is different from the author's, it loses what made the book special in the first place. So it's, which is the other issue I've hit with editors, that however much I prefer it not to be that way, a huge amount, because Amazon and most of the other retailers are in the United States, of the book market for indies is US facing. So lots of editors are in the United States and work to one of the US style guides, usually the Chicago Manual of Style. And so if you get an editor who knows you're British and internalizes that, it's okay. But if you get an editor who doesn't, I've had things come back where all of the U's have been taken out because it's all been converted to US spelling. It's like, well, I can understand that's US spelling, but do I want to pay for someone to go through and change all of the harbors with a U to harbors without a U, and so on?
Well, I would say that's poor on the part of the editor, because the first couple, that's fine. But when you get to the 10th or 12th one, you should be going, this seems to be UK spelling. Maybe I should check with the author before I continue doing this. Would be my take. But yeah, I don't know. And what I was thinking was that one of the key advantages I've been thinking of recently, which I've not been capitalizing on, is the speed at which I write. So I can get a first draft out, I can get a finished book out faster than most people can. So most people might take 6 months to a year. I can take 2 months and get a finished book out. So I can then respond to things that are happening on the market. So I haven't been doing this, but I could respond to, say, military sci-fi is hot at the moment. So potentially I could work on a military sci-fi book and have it out in 2 months and maybe capitalize on the fact that the market is hot. Although it seems to be on the wane now, so that would be kind of silly. But like some other subgenre. If I then use a professional editor and it takes them 6 months to edit the book, like I have to then schedule in when they're going to edit, and then they edit it, and then they get back to me, and I have to deal with the edits and so on. Well, then I've lost my entire advantage. In 6 months' time, that subgenre might not be hot anymore. So the one thing I would say is, for me personally, I would love a proofreader. I'd love to do as much as I possibly can, and then someone goes through and says, oh, you have doubled up a word here, or you're missing a comma, or something like that. But that they're expecting, a proofreader is generally cheaper because they're expecting to find maybe one error every few pages. They're not expecting an error every paragraph, which a copy editor or a line editor might. So a proofreader, I think, would be beneficial to me, but a copy editor and line editor, at least in my experience so far, have not been useful. I've ended up doing the same amount of editing I always do anyway, because when it comes back, I then go through it and find more errors. And as you say, it's also expensive.
Well, yeah, this is, I think, sort of, given a huge pot of money, you could go, I'll purchase it now, and in over the 10 years, potentially that margin between the book without the editor and the book with the editor will get me enough extra sales from recommendations and so on, and from people who didn't give up and return it and so on, that I'll make the money back. But from a purely business point of view, there is the point where, well, how long do I expect to have to wait to make the money back before it becomes a poor business decision? So,
and it's like, that's a good point, because like you can't be planning for what's going to happen when you're 50 or 60 or 70 or whatever.
Yeah.
And, oh, well, at that point, I will just about have made my money back. Well, that's not the way a business should work. And as on a point of that it's going to make more money, I've had all the first books in my series edited, other than the newest one that just came out. And I've seen zero difference in sales. So I would count that more people buying the second book. So the first books are all perma-free. So the second book, if that percentage went up significantly, then I go, okay, well, editing's worth it. That percentage has stayed the same, which means that the editing that's gone in there isn't enough people who are pedantic about that stuff to justify it. You will lose, a few readers because you haven't put commas in or whatever. Like that paranormal fantasy book, I'm sure maybe someone went, oh my God, you should have had commas there. This isn't properly edited. I'm not reading it. But especially in that genre, most people don't care. Because most people are reading a book or two a week. They're not expecting every book to be perfect. And the faster people read as well, the more forgiving they tend to be. So,
so that makes me laugh. For viewers who don't know, one of the things I do is run the short story half of Immerse or Die, which is a very strict reviewing system where instead of the book, reading the whole book and then going, well, overall the story was quite enjoyable, the characters were well crafted, it was an interesting take on paranormal romance. You score every time something makes you lose immersion in the book. So every time you realize I'm reading a book rather than just carrying on reading. So transposed paragraph, character's eye color changing, the punctuation mangling the meaning of a sentence or making it ambiguous. You score those, and when you hit 3, the book goes on the didn't pass pile. And so I have a reputation for being ridiculously strict on those, that lots of people pick up on, well, that's quite a minor thing. Well, I noticed I lost immersion on it. But the reason I was laughing is that I'm also a ridiculously fast reader. So the faster people read, the more forgiving they tend to be. And I think, yeah, apart from me, I'm picky and fast.
But other than Immerse or Die, though, you do continue with.
I do. I guess I do continue with books. So probably your point does hold, in that people who read very quickly tend to be people who read a lot as well. So they won't read a book in 5 minutes an evening because they spend 5 minutes a day reading. They'll read the book in an evening, and then they'll read another one the next evening. So I notice the mistakes, but then if they aren't engagement mistakes, if it's like a sentence doesn't make sense and I have to stop and spend a few seconds untangling the meaning, and I think, oh, actually that's not great. If the rest of the story's fine, I will go back in. So potentially, you're right, but most readers, particularly readers who read a lot, are going to potentially forgive the mistakes they notice. And it's, I
mean, I was talking to a friend in work this week, and we were talking about the word parsimonious. So his native tongue is Iranian, and then he's also learned Norwegian and English. So he's not, he wouldn't be into all the nitty gritty kind of words in English. And I said, oh, parsimonious means you're thrifty. And he said, well, then just say thrifty, or, you're miserly, or however you want to say it. And I said, yes, but this is a word that, people who write literary fiction might put in just to show off how many words they know. So you will lose people who want you to be using words like parsimonious and fancy words that most people would not know, but you're not going to lose 99% of people. Anyway, we can go on to cover design, since we haven't covered that yet.
Yeah, this is having said that editing might not be a great investment. Cover design, I think, probably is, unless it's a completely different skill from writing. Certainly I can produce a better cover by spending weeks on it than by spending hours, but I can't. No amount of sitting down and spending time carefully going over a cover I've designed in greater magnification is going to make up the fact that I'm not a graphic designer with an understanding of the cover market, which is very different in terms of what you're trying to do from the prose market.
And it's just it's a completely different mindset as well. So I've dealt with I've had quite a few cover designers now, and I've mostly had people who are good in graphic design but are not specialists in cover design, which is also So the Bite on the Line, for instance, has done incredibly well, considering it was the first thing I published. And I think that is in major part due to the cover design. And Sohail Tusi is a graphic designer. He's an artist, basically, a graphical artist who's incredibly talented. And then I said, okay, this is what I want on the cover. And then he did a great job designing it. I could actually pull it up so people can see it. Probably easier than talking about it. So what I was going to say was that we basically combined between us, we fluked into a cover that's worked incredibly well. If I share it here, you can see it there. So looking at that cover, then people can tell that it's a bit wacky, to say the least, and it's kind of fantasy-ish because it looks like a fantasy kind of cover. At least that's my take on it. So I kind of lucked into that back in 2014 before I realized what a cover really needs to do. And then recently, so then last year we had Green Star covers, for instance, which look really, really good. But then I've been recently seeing Chris Fox's videos, especially, but lots of other people talking about it, where the cover shouldn't be a piece of art. It shouldn't be, something you'd hang on your wall. It should be, this is what the genre is. Here you go. So if it's urban fantasy, it should have like a picture of a woman with maybe a stake in her hand and a vampire with no clothes on his chest, basically, bearing muscles and stuff like that. Because that basically says this is urban fantasy. If it's a romance, it should have a muscly guy and maybe a woman draped over him. So Chris Fox is doing military sci-fi, and he spent $800 on a cover, and he said, so with just a big ship, like a big spaceship, and like a planet in the background. And he said, I've been looking at this in thumbnail and the ship isn't clear enough, so I'm not using this cover. I'm going to go for a new cover costing $1,000 where the ship is clearer, with the same artist, the same guy who did the first cover. And that's how important it was to him. We'll see, his book is nearly finished, so he's going to put it on the market. That's how important to him the fact that you could see it was a spaceship on the cover was. That when someone looks at a thumbnail of his book, they needed to tell that this was military sci-fi, because military sci-fi books have a spaceship with some kind of space planet or something behind it. That says this is a military sci-fi book. So then you have to work within those limitations and then have a cover that still looks unique. It's not a copy paste of someone else's cover, that people can look at that and go, oh, that's Chris Fox's book, or whatever it happens to be. So that's kind of my new take on covers. But I would agree that covers are a vital thing to spend money on, and really you get what you pay for in covers as well. You can spend tons of money without getting what you pay for, but if you figure out what you're doing, your sales will often be a reflection of how good that cover is, and they certainly have been for the Bite on the Line. And another quick another quick point. I'd have it at launch. So having a poor cover, the first 3 months basically is what a lot of people are now saying. After that, it doesn't matter. You can't recover a book. That if you then fix the book, say the editing was terrible and the cover was bad, the book is dead anyway. Amazon's algorithms have basically ranked this as, this is not interesting to anyone, so I'm not going to show it to anyone. So it's too late to win it back at that stage. The only thing you can do is then move on to something else, and then maybe people will find it later. So a better book cover may help people discover that book later because they've read some of your other books, but that book itself, then it's too late. The cover isn't going to help it get back. Is at least my impression from what people have been saying.
I don't know. And so and there are some people who have approaches that avoid the Amazon algorithm. So instead of relying on Amazon to show people the book, they show people the book and link to Amazon. So for that approach, I think if you did a new cover and then got yourself some way of getting the book out there because you suddenly found a new market. So potentially if you were going, well, I'm going to try with Facebook ads, potentially finding your Facebook niche and then sticking a new cover on before you do that, there might be a boost there.
Yeah, I mean, you'd need to be so. I've had covers for $200 to $300 usually for a custom cover, and I've had pre-made covers, but for a custom cover, if you're talking $300, you'd have to be spending quite a lot on advertising to then justify spending $300 more on a cover. Now, I would say that having the Bite on the Lines cover has helped me immensely on Facebook, because showing that image where it looks like ludicrous fantasy means people go, oh, I know what that is. That's like Terry Pratchett. And then they go and read it if they want to. Which is also why my Facebook ads stopped working, because when I show that image to Terry Pratchett fans, they go, oh, more Terry Pratchett kind of stuff. Well, I definitely want to read that. And when I show it to Piers Anthony fans, they go, yeah, that looks stupid. I don't want to read that. That's a jet engine on the back of a thingy with some medieval knights. That sounds stupid. So yeah, I mean, that also helps. Having a custom cover definitely helps in general. And I've seen, is it Morgan Rice who writes the Clash of Dragons or whatever it's called?
Yeah, Morgan Rice definitely writes a fantasy series. I can't remember what it's called.
But I've seen that, I don't know if Morgan is a guy or a girl, but anyway, they have used stock art. So I had the same stock art image in one of my folders. I was thinking of using it. They used the same image. And then I saw people using that same image and calling their book something similar. And then, so Morgan Rice's fantasy series was massively successful. But then the covers look the same. The titles look similar. So then people might get confused, or even it just looks stupid because you've got your book and then another book with nearly the same cover beside it. Unless you're trying to scam people, you're kind of, it doesn't look the best. So yeah, in general, covers I think are definitely worth the money. But then that can definitely drag people in, but then you have to have the book to back it up.
Yeah.
Grant, was there anything else you wanted to add, Dave, before we wrap up?
Don't think so. No, I can't think. Editors and cover designers, it feels like there should be more professionals that you need to deal with, but I still haven't thought of any. But
not on the book side. I mean, you could have web designers and things like that as a self-publishing professional, but on the actual books themselves, I mean, you've got formatting as well. But if you own a copy of Scrivener, Scrivener does it for you. Which, if you're not going to get into the technical details of how to format a Mobi like Dave does, then what I always just use Scrivener and spit out whatever version it's got, because it makes it very easy then for me to do changes. So I go into my Scrivener document. I've learned a new thing actually in Scrivener, which is very useful, which is called collections. So for a series, you put them all the books into the same Scrivener document, and then you can make collections. So you could have a collection which is just the first book, and then a collection which is, say, the first 3, which is you're throwing out on Amazon for some reason, and then a collection which is the whole series, and it'll just spit out different versions without you having to change anything. And then you just change when you change the chapter 1 of book 2, you can then compile different versions of all of them and send them to Amazon. So that's really easy. So yeah, buy Scrivener if you don't have Scrivener. But yeah, otherwise you can get professional formatting, and what Dave does for our combined books looks significantly better than what Scrivener does. But for me, I'm of the opinion that I can't be bothered to learn how to format when what it spits out is good enough to be readable. No one is going to pick up a book that Scrivener has formatted and say, well, all the words are jumbled together, or paragraphing is wrong, or something like that. It all looks fine. It just doesn't look that extra bit.
Yeah, it's one of those things where, and it's an ineffable sense about a book. Certainly, formatting isn't going to make the average reader think, I don't like this book, and stop reading halfway through, so much as it makes the difference if the reader isn't passionate about the book anyway. So if your story hits a slow, dull bit because you haven't got the pacing on that chapter right, and the formatting isn't brilliant for reading, then the fact the formatting doesn't make that text as accessible as it possibly could be increases the chances the reader will think, oh, this is a bit tedious, put it down, and then not come back to it. So
I mean, going back to Chris Fox for a moment, so his books have a hard-coded font in them for the ebook, which then his writing books are great, but the hard-coded font almost made me stop. Whereas the Scrivener export would not have a hard-coded thing. You could change to whatever font you wanted. Because I then went into my fonts menu on my Kindle and tried to change it, and it just wouldn't change. And that was like, oh, this is... I think it was Courier New or something. It was a hideous font to read in.
Now that can have a big impact on your readership if you can't change the font, if you can't change spacing and type size, so on. There's a lot of people do get ebooks because of the accessibility options, so they can go, I want this, I want big text, I want to be able to really increase the line spacing and so on. So a Scrivener will throw out something that will accept your e-reader's line spacing and text size and so on. But
I mean, Scrivener is using the Kindle Jan thing, so it's going to throw out something that Amazon will be happy with. I mean, there was news today that Amazon has banned, or not banned, but withdrawn a lot of books from sale because they put their table of contents at the end. Which, that's a thing where you would have to choose to do that in some kind of formatting program like Calibre or whatever. If you're using Scrivener, it's just spitting out what Amazon wants. It's not going to be all fancy. The table of contents is at the start, which some people think is annoying, but that's the way Amazon wants it. I mean, that's kind of how formatting works. So I personally wouldn't pay for a formatter. I'm very happy that Dave does it on our joint stuff, but I wouldn't bother myself.
But yes, I know. As it happens, the reason people put the table of contents at the end it's so that you get as much of the story as possible in the free sample, because the free sample obviously takes 25%, 30% from the start. But if you actually get into the code, you can code an ebook so that the sample starts at the point you pick. So you can start the sample after all of the front matter if you do all the coding. So if you are coding it yourself, you can put the table of contents at the front and get round the problem that people have with having the table of contents at the front by not having the book start until after it.
I had an amazing book that I read this poem. I was using Stumble Upon. I came across a poem. I went, oh, I actually like this poem. I'm not a poetry fan normally. So I went, oh, I'll check out this guy's poetry book. There's one poetry book up. So I said, okay, I'll check out the sample and see if there's other poems or things I like. Because it's poetry, there's a lot of headings. So the table of contents was the entire sample. So I went, okay, delete. I'm not going to if I don't know if I like something, I'm not going to. His poetry book was like $10. I'm like, there's no way I'm spending $10 on something I don't even know if I like it. And you think that guy wasn't self-published, he was traditionally published, but like if he knew that was how his sample worked, I think he'd be pretty annoyed. Like, you don't want to give away, if it's poetry, you don't want to give away like 20 poems or something in your sample, but 3, 4, 5 something, so people can tell if they like it. Yeah,
you can. So there are ways around that problem if you go into it, and the alternative is to put it in Scrivener and just get out something that will meet Amazon's guidelines. So for an ordinary book, again, paying for formatting, and similarly when it comes to paperbacks, paying for someone to professionally set the text is probably a nice to have rather than a must have. So my takeaway from it is that if you've got a limited budget, the best place to spend it is on a cover.
Yeah, definitely. I would say that if you're selling, say, 20,000 copies of your book, then you can spend money on whatever you want. That's fine. I personally, if I was selling 20,000 copies of my book, say, I would have a hardback edition with a professional doing the formatting, because then I could have it on my shelf. But that would be just a kind of a, hey, look how cool this looks kind of thing.
Yeah.
Anyway, probably wrap up there.
Yep.
Next week we're going to be talking about, let's have a look. Next on the list is how to create a cover. Maybe we'll talk about that.
Yep.
After saying that a professional should do your cover, we can talk about the things that we have done to make covers that at least are okay to look at. No way as good as professional, but at least okay to look at. So yeah, we'll see you next week. Thank you very much for watching.
Right.